Welcome, everybody. Another edition of Legend Sports Amplify. We're talking Major League Baseball history, minor league baseball history, collecting art, card art, Negro Leagues, you name it. And today I'm really happy to have on researcher Eric Chalek. How you doing, man?
I'm great, Phil. How are you?
I am doing good. I am doing good. This is going to be fun because as we were talking before we got on here, I was talking about how this little project I'm doing here started, if you want to call it a project. I mean, it just was an effort to get the work, and many people have been doing this for such a long time, particularly with the Negro Leagues, research as far as authors, people involved with the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, other museums around the country, and I just wanted to get their work in front of people. And as I started doing this, I started discovering other things that people find really, really cool. And so, there's other things I've done. The Josh Gibson MVP campaign with the card art. I'm not sure if you've been following that, but that's been a blast to have them on and tell their stories. So I love, coming across people who are passionate about baseball, and that's when I stepped on yours because about 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, Baseball Reference announced that they were going to do the add the statistics to their database from the Negro Leagues, and that created an uproar in some circles. And so I was searching around trying to find Negro League baseball equivalencies or a way to figure that out, and I found you. And the stuff you have is just it's mind-boggling. I mean, I love it.
Thank you.
It's great, and the whole concept you did of creating your own Hall of Fame. We'll talk about all that, but I love origin stories, and I love finding out how people get to where they're at. And so what's the Hall of Miller and Eric? And tell us a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, they're kind of intertwined, so I guess I'll just give you a quick origin story.
All right.
That is, when I was about 9 years old, I got a book from, I think, Scholastic Book Fair or something like that. That was all about baseball statistics, and I knew very little about it. I had seen the back of baseball cards, and I liked baseball, and that's when I found out there was something more than home runs and at bats. There was not just batting average. There was on base percentage and slugging percentage, and those were interesting to me. But I wasn't like a Bill James acolyte or anything. I was just thinking that was interesting. And then as I grew up, I got more books. I don't know if you've ever heard of Chronology of Major League Baseball Records by John Mercurio. It came out in like 88 or 89. And I just devoured it. I love seeing all the old names and all the old numbers there. And, this guy from 1896, and then his record was surpassed by this guy in 1920. And I just dreamed myself into the olden days. I got Total Baseball. And then I started playing Earl Weaver baseball for any of you gamers out there,
Yeah.
and Status Pro baseball, a tabletop game. And in both, I started creating my own player cards, and
Yes.
that just spiraled out. In about 2000-ish, I got involved in something called the Hall of Merit, which is hosted at Baseball Factory,
Yes.
and part of their way of doing things was that they were going to elect Negro Leaguers in real time as compared to their white contemporaries, which is something that was kind of radical in a way that at that time. And so a couple of us on the site started trying to estimate, well, how would I compare Josh Gibson to Johnny Bench? How would I compare Josh Gibson to Babe Ruth or Oscar Charleston to Ty Cobb? And so in order to facilitate those comparisons, we started asking ourselves, how can we calculate an estimate for putting Negro Leagues players into the same environment as Major League Baseball players? And that was 20 years ago or so, maybe 15. And I've been noodling and evolving the method ever since, looking for continuous improvement. The Hall of Miller and Eric is a passion project with my blogging partner Howard Miller, and we are electing our own Hall of Fame based on a rigorous and honest look at what players did, not what they did off the field, not whether they were popular with, Joe Beat Writer, but to really look carefully, use the most modern methods that we have at our fingertips, make all the little nerdy adjustments that we like to make, and then do what the Hall of Fame can't do, which is recognize the very best players. And as part of that, of course, we've been electing Negro Leagues players. And when we started doing that, and that was about 4 or 5 years ago, I completely revamped my Major League equivalencies for Negro Leagues players. And so I'm continuing that process of making them ever richer and ever more realistic. And the proof is in the pudding. If you want to visit the Hall of Miller and Eric and check them out, you can decide for yourself if you think I'm on the right path.
Yeah, we're going to go out there and take a look at those because I think it's awesome. I really do. It's funny, we'd only talked for a minute before we got on here, but I started back when I was a kid in the 70s with Stratomatic, and that was Dyson cards, and every year it was like Christmas Day in March when they came out with their new card set. As we got older and I got into high school and then had friends and we had cars, I was only about an hour and a half from Long Island to drive out to Glen Head, and we would drive there and stand in line with about 1,000 other freaks in the freezing cold waiting for that card set. I mean, it was like better than going to a concert. We were standing in line for these cards. We were nuts. But, I played that for many, many years, had all the card sets. Then in the 90s, we came up with, like you said you did with Status Pro, we designed our own cards for Negro Leaguers. And this was probably 1991 or 2, and we started a league. There was about 15 of us besides myself, and we had a lot of fun with that. We tried to get Stratomatic to take a look at that because now it was coming up on the 50th anniversary of Jackie Robinson. But at the time, Hal Richmond did not feel that there was enough statistics. They were going to be statistically accurate, and so he didn't want to do it. Well, eventually they did several years later, but my set and my friend Larry Denicola and I, we did, it was over 900 players that we made for the computer game, and people loved it. And we weren't selling it or anything. Whoever wanted a copy, we sent it to them,
Yeah.
But anyway, and so then that's when I found Out of the Park. And Out of the Park, because you can have any season in baseball history, and you can set up the seasonal statistical baselines to be whatever you want. You can do so much if you're just playing around with simulation. So that's when I shifted over to Out of the Park. I've been doing it ever since. But anyway, it's what you're doing, I think, is really important in a sense that, like we talked before we got on here, people want to see something that they can relate. And you had a great analogy of that Pop Lloyd page. If you can tell everybody about that.
Yeah, if you've ever visited the Scene Heads Negro Leagues database and you've pulled up John Henry Lloyd's player page, and you hit show individual stints, you get this mile-long list of every single team and league and season in his career. And it's kind of mind-boggling if you're used to baseball history where the reserve clause kept a player with a team unless he was traded year after year after year. And they didn't jump teams, and winter ball wasn't something that anybody was tracking. So you have I think Lloyd probably has 40 or 50 lines of statistics. So if, I know what I'm looking at with those because I've spent some time with them. But if I was somebody who heard that the Negro Leagues were now classified as major leagues, and I went and took a look at that, I'd be lost. I'd have no frame of reference. I'd be like a child in the woods. And so part of what I hope that major league equivalencies, and I'll just call them MLEs from here on out, can do is to create a frame of reference for all of these wonderful players that people can intuitively understand. And if the MLE says that Josh Gibson hit 480 home runs, that makes sense, in a full career. Like people can really grasp that quickly. But when we say, well, he hit, 260 home runs, but he did it in this, in leagues of uneven playing quality, league, short seasons, like 1 or 5 or 25 plate appearances. I mean, it really becomes a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I, it's kind of like you need a like a Bodika or something to look him up, and say, oh, here's the Mexican League, 1941. Oh, and here are 3 great restaurants in the Mexican League. No, I'm just kidding. But we need some guideposts to
Mm-hmm.
understand uh, how good these guys were, and where they fall in the history of the game.
Mm-hmm. And that's what people
Yeah,
want to see. They want
yeah,
to have some kind of a point of reference that they could say, yeah. But it's interesting, right? Because like I said, the biggest reason for I think what you're doing is important is that um, people have pushback on the limited Negro League statistics, the incompleteness of those statistics, the varying levels of play, like you pointed out. Maybe they were playing barnstorming against the local, you know, firehouse team, and then the next day they were playing. But the thing about all of that is you need to understand the context as well, because it's funny because the Negro Leagues, and I tried to point this out a lot, is they did so much for spreading the baseball brand around the country to every little small town. And I don't think they get recognized for that because, it was through world wars and pandemics and economic downturns and depressions and you name it.
yes,
And they were going and people were spending money. I mean, the biggest thing that tells me that they were worth going to see is they would have thousands of people show up at a small town in Metuchen, New Jersey, or in the middle of Indiana, to see these guys play during the Depression. I mean, when cash is hard to come by, but yeah, people would go and they would see them play. They had to be a reason why. The level of play. Now, many times they were playing against the local boys. You want to see how the local boys do against the these invaders kind of thing. But I think people need to keep that in perspective. That this what they did was not only spread the brand of baseball, innovations. I mean, lights well before. I mean, literally that in some cases decades ahead of what Major League Baseball did with certain things, and they don't receive that credit for all that. And so that's why these stories I think are important, and I think it's important to get all the context. And so I want to take you out. Let's go to the Hall of Eric and Miller, and let's put it up, and we'll talk through. I want people to hear your methodology and how you came up with some of these equivalencies, because I think that um, they're what people want to see, and to some degree um, put some sort of context to it. But what's interesting while I'm getting this up here is when people are willing, and there we go, people are willing to. Let me get your thoughts on this. Okay, the Negro Leagues were playing, like we pointed out, they changed teams often. So they were way ahead of their time when it came to that, because free agency, like you mentioned, the reserve clause, they could go wherever they want many times, right? But they're okay with, in the 1800s, the game was played where there was a 50-foot pitching distance and no mound, and they didn't wear gloves, and they pitched underhand, and there was 9 balls and 7 strikes, and they're okay with statistics thrown into the record books from those time periods. And I'm not taking anything away from those time periods. The game evolves. I'm just saying, if you're okay with that, why are you not okay with Negro League statistics?
right.
Because they've recognized the Federal League, and they've recognized the American Association and the union and the players. And because these guys didn't spring out of the earth, right? When Jackie Robinson came along, all of a sudden for the next 15 years, the majority of rookies of the year and MVPs and all-stars were former Negro League players.
It's quite possible that the level of play in the National League in the 1960s was was one of the very toughest leagues to stand out in. There were so many stars of
Mm-hmm.
color emerging from there because the National League took the lead on desegregation, or I should say integration. you look you look at those MVP years, you look at the teams that come out of there. Even though the Yankees won a bunch of World Series, um, they there was a lot of they were facing some really tough challenges. You look at a team like the San Francisco Giants, incredibly talented team, and they only won what, one, two pennants in the
Mm-hmm.
1960s. In in the American League, they would have cleaned the clock of the league, Yankees and all. They were supremely talented, but when you've got the Braves and the Pirates and the Dodgers, all stacked to the gills with
Mm-hmm.
great players, and especially players of color, it was a very difficult time to stand out. And the Cardinals, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So it demonstrated really dramatically how important integration is to the quality of play in Major League Baseball. I've been looking um, into the effect of segregation. I've been doing some research where I'm taking the Major League equivalencies and I'm placing players into the major leagues, and I'm removing the worst of the players from the major leagues.
Mm-hmm.
So
Ah,
major leaguers in, crappy major leaguers out.
there you go.
And when you push those players into the league, what ends up happening is that you that the baseline of performance, the replacement level, if you
Yes.
will, in the majors goes up by about 10 runs,
Mm-hmm.
which is a win.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were like an average player, which is about two wins a year, right? Um, Now you're below average by about a win, and that's a lot when you think about the entire league.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of runs.
I'm glad you pointed that out because it's interesting. I've had this conversation so many times, and it's like after a while, I just want to hit my head against the wall because people just don't get it. They'll look at the Negro League statistics and they'll say all the things that they're going to say, right? And many of them are valid. I get it. I mean, they're not complete. There's still research going on. What was, are they making sure the quality of, games that are in there and so forth, right? However, baseball to me is a zero-sum game. If you're in the major leagues, someone is not, just like you pointed out. And so if you're saying that, I had someone make this comment, some of these major leaguers would hit 500 in the major leagues. No, they wouldn't, because they weren't doing it in Major League Baseball. And Major League Baseball was not, like you just pointed out, at the cup wasn't full either there. It's a great. I mean, I don't know how you would estimate that. I mean, at the bare minimum, it's probably 15 to 20% just based on population, but it's probably significantly higher. I mean, you look at today's breakdown on Major League Baseball, it's about 47, 48% are Latinos, Asian, African American players. Um, so somewhere between probably 15, 20% and 50%. And if you take other sports, obviously there's basketball and football, much higher, percentages. Um, yeah, there's a significant number that these major league players were playing all those years against AAA talent, if you want to call if you want to call it that, or worse, who knows? So I'm
I
glad.
think too, you have to think about the conditions that African American men um, were facing at that time. The
Yes.
Negro Leagues were a thriving business in the African American community. They were big money in the community, and um, and some of the wealthiest African Americans in the major cities where the Negro Leagues were were operating teams.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about the idea that we have, uh, generally speaking, we have young men who are lightly skilled or who are low skilled, and what are their chances for employment and for making a good living in the United States of the segregation era,
Mm-hmm.
when money's very hard to come by to start your own business if you're a black person.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. You're unlikely to get a loan from white banks, and so you have to find some way to put two nickels together. And for many of these men, this was an opportunity to earn really good money.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, probably relatively speaking, and I'm not sure about this, but I would guess that their opportunity to make a salary versus what they would do if they weren't in baseball was probably a lot higher relative to their white compatriots.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and so the economic incentive to be a baseball player was really high for them. And you know that this is true because when you read, for instance, if you ever read James Riley's
Mm-hmm.
biographical encyclopedia of Negro Leagues baseball, a lot of these guys, after they were in the game, they ended up being security guards, garbage men,
Mm-hmm.
really low skill jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And because they still didn't have those skills, they had exhausted their one really important skill, which was playing ball.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really easy to underestimate the economic incentive that these men had to play ball and say, well, you know, it would be a different proportion in Major League Baseball, would it? Would it
Yeah.
really? You
And
know,
then look at the fact that there were no other professional sports that you could make a living like that at. I mean, baseball pretty much was it.
baseball and boxing.
And boxing, there you go, boxing. I mean, and African Americans dominated boxing in through
That's right.
many decades. So it's interesting. The whole you've got to take it all. It's all in context, and that's like I said, the whole reason for having these conversations.
Right.
I want to try to get people in front and out there, so people can provide the context to all this and try to because it's a lot to wrap your head around because on top of
Truly.
all this these guys are around touring the country trying to make a living like you pointed out and then what happens they are having to um, deal with Jim Crow and all of the segregation around, that they had to deal with. That is just another layer on top of this. I mean, it took a lot of hard work, a lot of perseverance to keep on doing what they were doing. That's
I
for
just
sure.
bus rides alone, and
Right.
sometimes they weren't in buses. Sometimes they were all jammed into two cars.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing that they uh, didn't have like chronic injury problems
Exactly.
from riding in the back of a
Phil
bus on his bumpy roads.
Phil Dixon a couple of years ago did a tour where he drove I don't know how many. He did 300, 200 and some cities over the course of a year where he kind of followed some barnstorming tours from Kansas up into Canada and then across into the Midwest. And he said, after so many days in the car, and think about it, then they're getting out and they're playing a game, sometimes two games, sometimes three games in a single day, and then getting the heck out of town because what towns could they stay in?
Right.
What towns could they, did they have to get out of town by dusk because there were like what they call them twilight rules in towns? I didn't know this. I was talking to Alex Painter the other day. He said that there was something called a green book. Have you
Hmm.
ever heard of this?
Yes, I have.
Oh my goodness, I had not. I got to find out more about this. But it basically told these guys where they had the ability to go and stay and where they could stay safely. And it just blew me away when he was telling me about that. I have to find out more about that. But anyway, let's let's get into your work here because I could talk all day. I mean, I could probably talk to you until tomorrow morning about some of this stuff. So here we are. We're in the Hall of Miller and Eric.
Hmm.
And your first premise here is you took a statistical look. I'm I guess for lack of a better term, at which players would be in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. So tell us a little bit about your methodology on that.
Sure. Well, so we base most of our analysis on wins above replacement, and so we take what Baseball Reference shares and we adjust it for some of our beliefs and perceptions. For example, um, catching. Catchers tend to tend to put a lot of wear and tear on their bodies. They have shorter careers, so we might adjust a catcher's career up a little bit to
Mm-hmm.
um, compensate for the rigors of catching.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a bunch of little things like that we do, and uh, we bring in different defensive metrics. We I like to adjust for the historical usage of pitchers and how that's changed. We adjust relievers for their impact on wins and losses. We can make a whole lot of small, sometimes important, sometimes, nugatory adjustments. But in the end, we feel like what we're really after is something as close to the objective truth as we can get, given what we know about baseball and the statistical record and the current analysis available to us. And that's, okay, we're not going to reach the platonic ideal, obviously, but we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, exactly.
And we make, I would say, defensible, selections. We have reasons. The Hall of Fame, man, if you look at Harold Baines, no offense to Harold Baines, who I think is probably a really nice guy, but he and I belong in the Hall of Fame with a ticket in hand. He was elected because a bunch of people on the Veterans Committee that year knew him and liked him. And they say otherwise, but
there's many guys like that, isn't there?
There's many guys like
Rabbit Moranville comes to mind right off the top.
Rabbit Moranville was beloved in his time by writers and fans because he was a personality.
Yep.
But to me, he's kind of the Omar Vizquel of his time.
Yeah, maybe so.
And I don't think either of them belong in the Hall of Fame. And I am, how would I say this? I am curious about how somebody can look at Omar Vizquel and say, well, his fielding was beautiful. We should elect him right away. There's no aesthetic component mentioned anywhere in the Hall of Fame voting rolls. And so I don't really see where he was balletic in the field is a viable rationale for checking his name in the box.
So it's interesting.
In that case, Maria Tallchief could have been a Hall of Famer.
Right? So, I'm glad you pointed that out, because here's another piece of perspective that people need to understand here, right? Until 1947 and even well beyond, Major League Baseball, including the Hall of Fame, was dominated by white people, white guys, white males, right? And
right.
As come to find out, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, with what's going on with the Josh Gibson Award, he was not really very helpful when it came to, a lot of things. Come to find out that J.G. Spink of the Sporting News, who, they were the Bible, the go-to source for baseball coverage for decades. He was not the most, helpful. And so, now his name is off the Baseball Writers Association Award, as Kennesaw Mountain Landis is off the MVP Award. So these were the guys who had the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. And so they're going to portray things favorably, unfavorably, highlight things who are, one of the things that in the Sporting News, I went back, because I have to see things for myself. You're probably the same way. When they talk about this, there was some articles in the Sporting News back in the 40s, around the time of Jackie Robinson, where there's no mention of Jackie Robinson, even as if he didn't exist, until the World Series, when he was thrown out, in a rundown or something. That's the only mention that was talked about in this season recap. And I'm like, wait a minute, why would that?
He was the Rookie of the Year, after all.
Right? Why would that be? And you know why that was. And so it's just another layer of perspective. If people are reading stories based on some of these accounts, and don't get me wrong, most of them are good, but they've got to also understand that there was a little bit of bias here, a little bit of yes, racism involved, and so what you maybe are reading is not all of the truth, because the guys who
and
had
at
the
the
keys.
same time, we also have to recognize that these are really flawed human beings. But they also did things that were really important to the game too.
Yes.
Kennesaw Mountain Landis cleaned the game up.
Yes.
That was an existential crisis for the game, and at the same time, not so helpful on the desegregation front.
Yep.
J.G. Taylor Spink was the Sporting News. The Sporting News was the Bible for baseball. It was the ESPN of its day, or the MLB.com of its day. That's huge for the baseball community, and at the same time, not so helpful on the desegregation front. even Branch Rickey, who is often lionized for his role in Jackie Robinson's career, even he had negative markers against him. He was a cheapskate, you know. He was notoriously cheap, and he was a notorious windbag. You know, they're all flawed people, and it's just for me, it's sad that that some that people who did a lot of good for the game um, had this unfortunate um, belief about African American people,
Hmm.
and but it's also unfortunate that people who are um, people who are rightly lionized are not necessarily always portrayed as full human beings.
Hmm. That's
And
exactly
we
right.
have to see the whole thing
You
in order to
do.
really appreciate them.
Context and perspective, they all
It's
matter.
everything.
Yeah, you have to.
Context is everything.
It really, really is. What I really enjoy about everything you've got on here with this is you let people download the spreadsheets and all.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
that is very, very cool. So you're letting people, if they could take your work and try to figure out their own spin on this. That's really
Yep.
nice of you to do that. Yeah, most people.
Well, look at to me that's the tradition that I'm standing on the shoulders of. People like Larry Lester and Dick
Mm-hmm.
Clark and all of the people who have made Negro League's research what it is today. They might write books, and okay, that's not free, but it's pretty close to free.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, they have encouraged other people to take their research and work with it.
Yep.
They have freely given their time and their energy, and to me, that's a beautiful thing that we can all work together,
Mm-hmm. That's a
and we
great point.
can, yeah, we can. It's not, the work I'm doing is a lot of fun, and I get a lot of pleasure out of it. I'm also guessing that somebody someday is going to take what I do and make it a whole heck of a lot better, and I hope they do,
Mm-hmm.
because the more that we work as a community together and build on each other's
Awesome.
on each other's research and analysis, the better we're all going to be.
Awesome. That's a great point about we need the next generation because there is so much more work to do, especially on the Negro Leagues. That I've tried to have on a couple of younger guys who are just starting out or just finding some interest in this, who maybe have had um, one of the like James Brunson is a teacher and he's had an impact on several of his students and they're now getting into this and you need that next generation of people. That's a great point. And so yeah, any help you can give them, yeah, I applaud you, man. That's really cool that you feel that way. It's neat because a lot of people are sometimes they're very protective of their
I
of their
will say
stuff,
I do want to issue a caveat here that the site is not completely up to date. What we're
Sure.
looking at, um, my latest round of MLEs has yet to be posted very soon,
Okay.
but it's not there yet. So what you're looking at is about a year old, and there's the most recent stuff is coming.
So let's do that. Let's talk about the MLEs and what you're able to discern out of this,
Yep,
out of that. And I'm gonna while you're talking, I'm just gonna scroll down through your through your uh,
sure.
honorees that are in your Hall of Miller and Eric, which is very cool, actually.
Well, one thing that I can tell you um, is that the is that it's not necessarily a simple thing to pin down someone's career.
Mm-hmm.
As more information comes along, somebody might suddenly zoom upwards, or they might
Ah.
plummet. So, there have been cases like Willie Foster. His later seasons were the first to come out, and he didn't look so great. Now he looks a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, Willie Foster may not yet have the kind of numbers that to me scream Hall of Fame. And that's just my finding.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not far, but he's probably not over the line yet. We'll see in a couple of weeks when I post the new numbers. But uh, so I also have in my head, well, there's this entire body of work that's qualitative, and I'm just looking at the quantitative side. How much of the qualitative side and the quantitative side should be merged together.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really interesting questions to ask there. For instance, um, is saying something like so and so struck out this many players in a game, is is that sort of career highlight anecdote by itself enough to say, oh yeah, he's clearly a great player? Might not be, especially in the Negro Leagues. I'll give you a really good example is John Donaldson.
Mm-hmm.
And no offense at all, please, to any John Donaldson fans, but we there's there's a lot of stories and research around Donaldson struck out, what was it, 27 guys in Minnesota?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem is that he wasn't playing a top-rated team. In fact, he was playing a much more regional or local team.
Mm-hmm.
When John Donaldson got into the top ranks of the Negro Leagues, he only struck out about five guys, 4.5, 5.5 guys per 9 innings.
Mm-hmm.
So when he gets into the top levels that he's allowed to get to, he's a really good pitcher, but he's not a 27 strikeout per
Mm-hmm.
nine kind of guy. There's, Joe Williams has similar stories. Joe Williams was a great pitcher, but Joe Williams, wasn't going to strike out 21 guys, even some of the time against top level competition. So we have to be really careful. There's of course, the famous example of, well, Josh Gibson hit 800 home runs in his career,
Right.
but about 650 or 600 of them, or maybe 550, were not against top competition. They were against somebody in, East Bumbledoo,
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania. And I don't mean that as a slight against Gibson or East Bumbledoo, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
I just mean to say that if it's not against top quality competition, it's really difficult to nail down what it means.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean if Josh Gibson hits a home run against a local semi-pro team? It doesn't mean the same thing as if he hit it off Satchel Paige. It doesn't mean the same thing as if he would have hit it off of a major league pitcher. It just doesn't. And that's okay. We just have to be able to contextualize that. So I have an interesting relationship with the qualitative history. I'm a little bit of a skeptic because I also know that people's memories are incredibly fallible. You look at major league, ex-major league players, and they say, well, in our day, we never did that. And somebody comes along and says, oh yeah, what about this story and this story and this story?
Mm-hmm.
Because people forget, or their memories change over time. They're not entirely reliable. So we need to
Great
have
point.
we need to have a strong balance between objective and qualitative information.
And the perspective or the angle that story is coming from. Is it someone who wants to portray it in a certain light, one way or the other? Did they have a beef that they are now saying that something that was looked at one way? They're saying it really wasn't because they had an issue. It really is interesting, and you have to kind of weed through all of the sift through all the noise that's out there,
Right.
and come up with something. And what you're doing here, I mean, it's an effort to try to sift out some of that noise. So
Right.
so how do you? So I don't want to bring up the spreadsheet because I think it's gonna, Uh,
Yep.
so can you walk us through how do you get to a Major League Baseball equivalency from Negro League statistics?
Sure. So let me talk about hitters. So the key for me is a mathematical technique called z-scores. And I'm an English major. I didn't know about z-scores until I started working on this stuff. So what z-scores do is a z-score is the number of standard deviations from the mean that a player is from the league. Now that's a whole lot of like math talk. It's just how far are they from the average player?
Mm-hmm.
All right. But the thing with z-scores that's cool is that if you are one standard deviation away in the Negro Leagues, then you can say, well, what does one standard deviation look like in the major leagues? Right. So now I can say, okay, I'm going to put him one standard deviation away in the major leagues. Now I'm going to adjust for the quality of play. Now I'm going to adjust for, whatever else I'm going to adjust for. And I'm going to be able to find something that looks like an actual major league number.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this brings up the question of quality of play. It's a really important question, and it's a really difficult question to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have answered it by comparing one year to the next of players who played in one league and then the other. That has its ups and downs. Um, one Something I've looked into is, what did players who played in the Negro Leagues, what level of play did they achieve in organized baseball at any level? For batters, the typical Negro Leagues hitter in the major leagues came in as a slightly above average hitter.
Mm-hmm.
They were definitely an above average hitter in double A, excuse me, triple A. But those are only the guys there's selection bias there. Those are only the guys who got the call to be into organized baseball. So you have to figure there's a whole range of guys below them on the totem pole who are not major league caliber players. In fact, I did a little research that suggested that that the Negro Leagues gave about 10 to 20% more plate appearances to players who were below average hitters. Now you might ask, how can you have that? How can that many guys be below average, right? Because they gave more playing time to their best players. Okay, so there's a little bit of a balancing act there. But if you give 10 to 20% more playing time to below average hitters, that means that a lot more of the hitters in the league are below average players. So when you think about that, it says to me, gee, it's not the case that the Negro Leagues were uniformly major league level in terms of the talent on hand. I think personally that the Negro Leagues were probably had about maybe 6 or 8 teams worth, maybe 5 to 7 teams worth of major league talented players, and then there was a whole lot of players who wouldn't be able to make a major league squad.
But you do the math on that, though, right? There was only 16 teams in Major League Baseball.
That's right.
So six of 15 is 40%. That's in that. It's in my head that makes sense.
Exactly.
That 40%.
It all comes back to that
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? I like the way you do that, because you need to kind of triangulate, right? You need to look at it from different angles, different perspectives, different calculations, and if they're all telling you the same thing, more or less, and that's kind of how you do it, right? When you're doing research or you're doing any kind of project, right? Let me ask you this.
Just to finish the thought, where I've landed is that the Negro Leagues on the whole were roughly AAA level, top to bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But the best players, a big chunk of the players, were major league caliber players.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Just so you know, that's where I landed.
And so, and then flipping that to where we talked about the zero sum, right? That would mean in Major League Baseball, it was kind of maybe flipped the other way. 60-40, some of those guys would be, and that would be the replacement. Because the one thing that people need to understand too, right? The Negro Leagues were already playing with Latin players.
That's right.
For their entire, going back to the 1800s, Major League Baseball was not. There was a few who slipped through because they looked white, but very, very
Golf
few.
Luque, for instance.
You could count them on one or two hands, right? The number of guys who did that. And so, but let me ask you this question, because it's always been in my mind, right? You watch, and sports, and you talk about the Branch Rickey, the aura around that, right? You watch movies like 42, you watch any movie, really. I streamed the other day, Soul of the Game. What they talk about is the players who got the call, especially in the early years of the game becoming less, the color line going down, were the ones who they thought would be most acceptable and would cause the least amount of problems. So are there, and I would say probably yes, you're talking about how the hitters and the quality of those hitters. I would be willing to bet that there were a number of players who never got the opportunity because of reputations. A lot of them had reputations of being hotheads and whatever, right? And they didn't want
And
to have
some of
any.
those reputations are based in racist thinking as well.
Exactly, yes, or the showboating, right? Oh, they don't want the showboating,
Hmm.
right? Like what's going
Yeah,
on today, right? The showboating. So,
right.
do you think that there's some of that involved? That there were guys who could have made it to the major leagues that just were never given the opportunity just because of factors like that?
I mean, I can't speak to it myself. I think, I haven't done any, I haven't looked at it very closely, but it surely seems like that must be the case. On the other hand, baseball tends to be, sports tend to be a bit more meritocratic than
Yeah,
the rest of society. So maybe teams were saying, well, okay, we can give him a shot if he's a really good ball player. But I think, I think generally it's likely that that's the case. But there are guys like Hank Thompson. Hank Thompson was a bit of a case. He was a heavy drinker. He had some issues here and there, but he got the call.
true.
And but on the other hand, there was a guy like Jackie Robinson. When you look at when you read about Jackie Robinson, he had a real combative streak in him. He really wanted to win, and he really didn't want to take no for an answer. And he really had to bear down and not react early in his career.
Hmm.
That must have been so incredibly difficult for him. He was a very proud man, and deservedly so.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
it's interesting that he was the first player to break the color line.
It
On the other
is.
hand, you got Larry Doby, who was more withdrawn and probably was more like the kind of player you were just talking about.
Hmm.
It's everything. There's
Yeah.
every kind of person.
Yeah, and I imagine now, when you're talking who's in the front office of a Major League Baseball team, what are they going to be okay with? Yeah, boy, oh boy, so a myriad of variables that, boy, oh boy, at this point, how do you put any kind of, how do you put, I don't know how you put a gauge on it, but, so the other thing that I wanted to ask you too about is, are we seeing today kind of a Negro League pitching effect here? And what I mean by that is we start this season with all of the no hitters and people, the spin rates on balls through the roof and balls, like wiffle balls. I mean, they were, you watch some of these pitches and you go, how on earth, right? And now all of a sudden they're cracking down a little bit on spider tack and whatever else that they're using on the ball, and you're seeing those numbers coming down a little bit. Was there something similar going on? Because the Negro Leagues, you could use whatever you wanted to do to that ball. Pretty much, there was no rules against spitballs, shine balls, emery board balls, whatever you wanted to throw,
Well, this
as
is a
opposed to the major leagues.
really interesting question, Phil. And I'm really glad you asked it because I've done a little bit of looking into that area. Pitchers who went from the Negro Leagues to organized baseball fared much worse than hitters, much worse, to the degree that they probably were more like AAA level results than even AAA or Major League level. My theory on that has has been that, as you say, the Negro Leagues allowed all sorts of ball doctoring and trick pitches. They also didn't change the ball
Yes,
very often.
yes. How often? Yes, exactly.
Right. So
The same ball
how's
for
a
the
hitter
whole.
gonna?
Yeah.
Yeah. So later in the game, you're nursing a 3-run lead, but you don't really have to worry about putting one down the pipe because who's going to hit a big sweet potato
Yeah, exactly.
out of the ballpark, right?
That's
So
awesome.
so now you go into Major League Baseball and you're a pitcher and you can't throw your shine ball, emery ball, your cutter, not your cutter, your the cut ball. The balls are taken out of play much more often, and you're not going to be able to work as deep into games. You're going to give up more runs, and it's going to be a lot tougher. And I have a theory, and I'll lay it out here. I'm not saying it's right, but I have a theory that the Negro Leagues had a different idea about the defensive spectrum than than the major leagues did. The defensive spectrum was an idea of Bill James, where on this side of the spectrum you've got your first baseman and your left fielder, guys who are
Hmm.
kind of lumbering,
lumbering, not so great fielders, but they can really hit. On the other side, you've got your catcher and your shortstop and your second baseman, guys who don't have to hit as much because the defensive responsibilities of their position are so much more, so much higher. Pitchers are way off that end because they don't have to hit pretty much any at all. People just say to them, pitch. So they're way off the end. In the Negro Leagues, I think it was a little different. I might be wrong about this, and this is conjecture on my part, but I think the Negro Leagues, that as they acquired talent, they emphasized the skill positions of catcher, shortstop, and center field, depending on your handedness, of course. Center field for the really athletic lefties. Then they chose for pitchers. There's a bunch of guys like Lázaro Salazar, like Martin Diego, like Bullet Rogan, who played center field and pitcher, or something like that. They played a lot of positions, but they never were really just one or the other. They were in that sort of pitcher center fielder zone. They had their skills in both of those were probably roughly equal, but they couldn't play shortstop, or they would have played shortstop. They didn't catch because they couldn't catch. But as they moved down the defensive spectrum, they're kind of in between pitcher and center fielder. And I think that's where the defensive spectrum differs for the Negro Leagues. That guys like John Henry Lloyd didn't get chosen for pitcher because he was a great shortstop and they could see it. Dick Lundy, same thing. Oscar Charleston, he tried his hand at pitching a little bit, but you know what? He was better as center fielder. The same was true of Ben Taylor. Ben Taylor tried his hand at pitching. He was a better first baseman than pitcher. So they would try to get you into the most athletic position possible. This is my guess. And so pitcher came a few clicks down from the most difficult defensive positions. Satchel Paige couldn't have played shortstop or center field. Mm-hmm. His athletic skills didn't allow, but he was a fantastic pitcher, so that's where he landed. Mm-hmm. As opposed to starting with pitching, which seems to be what the big leagues do. If you can pitch, you pitch. That's not exclusively true, but if you can pitch, you're going to get a look at pitcher. Mm-hmm. That's been the common wisdom for years.
John Donaldson was a center fielder pitcher. He fits into that kind of that mold you're talking about.
Yeah, and you know why I think that they did that was because they had small rosters. They had, depending on the era we're talking about, 11 to 16-man rosters. So you want to get your best athletes into the most important positions because you want to lock those down. And maybe they can pitch too. Maybe you can find some other arms. But if you've got a core of talent up the middle, you're going to be a really strong team.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to put the website back up again for just a sec because I want people to see your methodology here.
Sure.
So you walk through all of your steps, and you talk about the quality of play in leagues, and so how did you come up with these? All this I'm assuming is you and Miller, coming up with this, or did you use any of the Bill James work or anything like that to come up with any of these things?
Yeah. So the quality of play comes from a few different places, right? Clay Davenport, who used to be part of Baseball Prospectus, used to do these Davenport translations where he would he would look at leagues of varying quality and compare them to major leagues on the basis of how many runs you would lose moving up the chain. So I began with his work, and assuming that I could match the Negro Leagues up in there somewhere. And then some of the other research I've mentioned already, and then I talked to guys like Kevin Johnson and Gary Ashwell a lot, not a lot, but it's a lot to me. To them, it's probably like meh, but because they're amazing, and they've got so much else to do, I feel bad bothering them. But through a lot of conversation, a lot of research, a lot of looking at other people's work, that's how I sort of zeroed in on things. So I've tried to keep it so that I'm working within the AAA, AA, high A, low A, rookie ball framework. It's a familiar framework. We can understand how good a league is on that basis, and basically it boils down to where the research and kind of pushes me toward. And I try to go where the numbers say, because I don't want to be making up my own BS about this. I'm trying to be as objective as possible.
So when you do these, so I think this process you laid out here is really really cool. If people take the time to get out here and take a look at this, so you're actually placing into context the player within his own league, within Major League Baseball context, adjusting it for the quality of his league, the park, strength of schedule, all kinds of things, which is really really. This is the kind of stuff I think that people want to see. And again, people can look at this and they could take it for, as much stock as they want to put into it. But when you've done a lot of your homework here and tried to lay out your methodology so that people can understand, it's not just someone, and you're using already accepted, calculations for Major League Baseball. So I think people could put a little bit more stock into this. So
the aim for me is to present something that looks like what Baseball Reference gives you.
Yeah.
Because so many people go to Baseball Reference. They're the gold standard.
So let's take a look. Now, so if I click on this, where's the Oscar Charleston example? If I click on his name?
Oh, well.
It says here, we'll run through a real life example for Oscar Charleston. So you've got his name is a link. Let me see if I click on, where's that go? Oh, it goes to the seam heads.
I think it's, this is, unfortunately, this is another out of date document. But yeah, so I start with his offensive production. It is a little bit, I've narrowed it down quite a lot. But we start out with his offensive production. We compare it to his league. We place that comparison into major leagues. We adjust it for the quality of play, and anything else we need to, and then we estimate his playing time based on his own durability rates and the number of plate appearances per game in a given season.
Okay.
And then we also have to estimate fielding, base running, and things like that too. So in the end, you're going to come out with something that looks very familiar if you've been to the wins above replacement section on any player's Baseball Reference page. And I'm working now on trying to turn those value stats back into playing stats. I'm hoping to figure that out. It's a little tricky, but I want to be able to say, well, Oscar Charleston probably hit 350 home runs or something like that. And probably got around 3,000 hits.
Yeah.
We'll never have exact precision, but to be able to say, here's an estimate that can at least get you part of the way there is better than we have now.
Absolutely. So here I found the real example, Oscar Charleston, 1921. He played for the St. Louis Giants. Let's see. Compared to his own league. So tell us, what does this mean, this calculation here?
Yeah, like I said, this one's a little out of date, but what I use is weighted on base average, which is what I now use is weighted on base average. This is a little out of date, which is pretty much where the state of the art. It weighs a player's on base and slugging abilities in an appropriate fashion, makes a rate stat out of it, compares it to the league's average, and you can port that from one league to another using standard deviation, and that's really the key. I'm finding the player's performance in context, placing it in this other context, and then modifying it based on what we know about his originating league and his parks and things like that.
So at the end of the day, what is this all telling us about Oscar Charleston?
It's going to tell us that Oscar Charleston was one whale of a player.
Yes, he was.
Yes, he was. His 1925 season is absolutely stunning, astounding. It wouldn't surprise me if Charleston had hit 400 once or twice in the 1920s. I don't think that. We often hear things like he's the Babe Ruth of his time in the Negro Leagues. I don't think anybody should be compared to Babe Ruth, because Babe Ruth is sort of like the Elvis Presley of baseball. He was a guy in one place at one time who had certain conditions that allowed him to be something other than what anybody else was ever like and ever will be. But Oscar Charleston was just an amazing, amazing talent. Charleston may be a little overrated, actually. He got kind of pudgy in his 30s.
Mm-hmm.
After like age 32, he kind of beefed
That's
up.
why he moved to first. That's why he moved to
muscle.
first base after that. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and his bat slowed down too. So you're really looking at Oscar Charleston in his 20s and early 30s,
Yeah.
and that's what you want to look at for him. He's just an incredible player during that time, and a good, if not spectacular, player after that. So what you're going to find here is that early in his career, he was a guy who would have been near the top of the leaderboards in the value stats.
So I see at the bottom here, you've got, after all those calculations, for 1921, Oscar Charleston would have been 4th overall in wins above replacement in all of Major League Baseball. 2nd in the American League, only to Babe Ruth. Interesting. Yep. And Roger Hornsby, which, arguably the greatest right and left-handed hitters in Major League Baseball history, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some other people say, well, Charleston was the Ty Cobb of the Negro Leagues. Again, Cobb is a nearly unique talent, and I think it's very difficult to compare anyone to Cobb. More like Speaker, probably because Speaker retained more of his skills in his 30s, probably less than Speaker overall, is my guess. At least that's what's coming out right now. But he was an amazing, amazing player.
Mm-hmm. So the spreadsheets that you have out here that people can download if they wanted to, what would they be able to do with them? It's not like a don't try this at home kind of thing. What would they be able to do if they were going to do some of their own, playing around with some of these numbers? And where is that?
What they could do is see what I've done and say, Eric, I think the Negro Leagues were a little better than AAA, and they could boost up my numbers on that basis. They could say,
there you go.
I don't think this would have happened it this way. I'm going to knock it down a little bit, or I'm going to ratchet it up a little bit, and they can do whatever they like with them. They can turn them into OOTP player records. They can turn them into Stratomatic cards. And
interesting.
They can do what I like to do, which is make my own Hall of Fame.
Awesome. Yeah. I think they're fantastic. It's funny you mentioned that about OOTP and Stratomatic, right? I did way back in the beginning. I set up the 1920 season because it was the Negro National League's first season. Because when you download it or when you set up the game, it comes with the 1920 Negro National League season.
Yes.
So I went ahead and I fine-tuned that so that it. I'm gonna show you this real quick. It'll only take a second because it's very. I think it's very cool. So I just played last night the 1920 World Series, and it was interesting because in the Major League Baseball, the Giants and Reds finished tied for the National League. They had a one-game playoff that the Giants won, and the Yankees won the American League. Ruth hit 47
there's a
home
shocker,
runs.
right?
Yeah, and so then, though, in the World Series, though, the Giants won in 9 games. They had a 4-1 lead. Yankees came back, and they were best of 9 World Series back in these days.
Yep.
The Yankees won games 6, 7, and 8 to tie it at 4 games apiece, and then Fred Toney bested the Yankees in Game 9.
And we all know what Fred Toney's famous for, the double no-hitter with Hippo Vaughn.
That's right.
18? Yeah.
That's right. And
I
then
think Jim Thorpe broke up one of the no-hitters with an infield single or something like that.
Did he really? Wow.
I think it was Jim Thorpe. I can't quite remember.
And then in the Negro Leagues, I took a little bit of liberties here, some poetic license, and I actually set up Eastern Colored League, which did not exist until 1924, but because the players were playing, but they weren't part of the Negro National League, I didn't want to miss the careers of some of the greats like Smokey Joe Williams and Louis Santop and so forth, right? So I got them in here, I set them up ahead of time, and I played a World Series. And this similar happening, the Chicago American Giants and Detroit Stars tied at the end of the regular season, and the Giants won in the playoff game to win the Negro National League. They played the Bacharachs in the World Series, and same thing happened. Atlantic City was up 4-1. Chicago wins games 6, 7, and 8 to tie it up, and then in game 9, Red Ryan bested
underrated pitcher.
Yeah, bested Tom Williams 5-3. The American Giants were down 5-0, scored 3 in the ninth, and had the tying runs on base when it ended. So it was really a pretty cool finish. So now
I saw in there. If you could scroll down just a little bit, scroll down to the lineups. Oh, I know it's the leaders here. I see Heavy Johnson's name. I see John Beckwith's name.
Yeah. Those
two guys are probably really underrated by history.
Johnson was a heck of a player, yeah.
He was one whale of a hitter.
Yes, he was.
Now we don't have
Edgar
as
Wesley.
Much
you see
Edgar Wesley, yeah.
Edgar Wesley had 98 RBIs. And now, again, just to caveat this before I let you finish here, I set this up. This is a 132 game schedule, just so people could see it more like in a modern context of
sure
games played. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that John Beckwith may be as good a hitter as Josh Gibson. And I know that's going to make some people go crawling up the walls. Mm-hmm. But that guy could really hit. I mean, he could hit like the Dickens. Mm-hmm. And it's worth looking into him if you're looking for somebody that you want to kind of get into that you haven't looked up before. Uh-huh. Heavy Johnson, man, he could really mash. The statistical record's a little light on him, but boy, what a hitter.
And that's the thing, right? So many of these guys were playing on barnstorming. It's funny, right? Because some of these leagues, even in the 1920 Negro National League, some teams only played 30-some games, some played 60-some games, right, in 1920. But they played probably closer to 150 to 200 games that year. Between barnstorming and sometimes more than that, sometimes into the 200 and 300 games, yes. And so think of the wear and tear on these guys, and the travel schedule and everything else involved. I mean, you really got to wrap your head around it. Like I said, that the context of all this is so important. So I wanted to show that the type of thing that's Out of the Park can do that you're talking about, because this is 1920. Every season it readjusts for the statistical baseline for that particular season, and so you're seeing the dead ball and whatnot. If you want to I did a project where I went back to 1858 with the history of baseball, but I set it at 154 game schedule and a more average statistical baseline, which would have been probably somewhere between like maybe 1970 and 1988 maybe, and so you're able to see, well, Home Run Baker, how many home runs would he hit if he wasn't playing in the dead ball, right? Would Home Run Baker gets this name, but he never hit more than 12 or 14 in a season, So, but if he was playing in the 1930s, he might have hit 25 to 30. I mean, it all really depends on.
Boy, talk about an underrated player, though. Home Run Baker is not all that widely talked about. He was a truly wonderful player.
Yes, he was.
He's almost never mentioned.
No.
But
how about,
he really could hit.
How about the fact that Ty Cobb won a Triple Crown? He hit 9 home runs.
Yeah.
When he won, and then in that same season, right? I don't remember what year it was. Maybe it was 1908, 1910, something like that. But didn't he also led the league in stolen bases? Is he the only one to ever do that? He may be. He may be. So it just gives you, the context when you look at that and you go, Triple Crown with 9 home runs. But that was leading the league. I mean, nobody was hitting home runs back in those days. So, it is fascinating. So. So back to this. I'm sorry, I got off track here. I could probably talk about this stuff with you like I said, till the sun comes up tomorrow.
Luckily, I've got all the time in the world.
Because I love this kind of stuff. I think the what ifs, and trying to come up with some logical way to look at them, because that's really what people want here. So where are your actual spreadsheets that you have?
If you go to the tab above that says Negro Leagues, it's right above the right at the end of that menu there, above the baseball.
Gotcha.
You go
All
there,
right.
click that, and should be
Oh,
link
here,
there.
download this file. This all MLE career lines.
That's right.
Okay, so that will have all of the information that people would need to do something like you're talking about. Put in their own way
It'll
of
give the
kind of
career lines.
scenarios.
I don't remember if I've updated the another spreadsheet there that gives you some top players and their seasonal yearly MLEs for top Negro Leaguers.
Okay.
That'll give you another look at a deeper season by season look at some of the most
Oh,
more
wow,
important players.
that's cool. Season by season, very, very cool. And now you've also done something, and because like I said, I don't want to keep you all day, even though I could talk all day. But you've also done something with NPB as well, right? Haven't you talked?
That's right. I was very interested. For whatever reason, I got very interested in Japanese baseball, and it's actually quite fascinating. It really is.
Oh, absolutely.
And I totally recommend anything that Robert Whiting has written. Very, 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 very entertaining. And Japan has an interesting set of baseball traditions that are very different than the U.S., and yet they play the same game. It looks the same on the outside, but they do things very differently, or at least they used to. I think they probably are much more like the major leagues nowadays than they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always been curious, like what would Sada Haruo have done in the major leagues?
Right.
And it looks to me like he'd have hit somewhere in the vicinity of 450 to 500 homers, and he would have been on base all the time, and he would have played a slick first base. He would have been a great major league player.
Mm-hmm.
And he would have, in his time, he probably would have dominated the National League in the same way that like Frank Robinson or somebody like that was.
Mm-hmm.
I hesitate to say Willie Mays, because comparing people to Willie Mays is a bad idea. Just like comparing people to Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb.
Yeah.
And there are a number of other very interesting players. O is the one that everybody, if they know anything about Japanese baseball, they know him. But there are a number of other very interesting players. I'm quite taken with, I'm probably going to say his name wrong, Hiromitsu Ochai,
yeah.
Ochai, yeah.
Yeah.
Who is something of a renegade and a Triple Crown threat every year. And I would love to read a book just about him. He's fascinating. And then there's the Derek Jeter of Japan, a guy who's like Mike Schmidt and Derek Jeter put together, and that's Shigeo Nagashima.
Mm-hmm.
And a tremendous hitting and fielding third baseman who is like the matinee idol of all matinee idols in Japan.
Awesome.
I happen to think that being that I live in Red Sox country, I happen to think that Derek Jeter's the lionization of Derek Jeter might be a little laid on a little thick by the press. And if you think that, like
Mm-hmm.
I do, you're going to really be interested to hear about Nagashima. I mean, they just idolize him.
Yeah.
He's practically like the baseball god over there.
Yep. And there's so many stories. I mean, before Cal Ripken, Sachio Kinugasa was the Iron Man of Japan, and so many great stories. That same set that we did the 800 or 900 Negro League players, we also added in as many Japanese players into that as well, and we integrated them all into the Major League Baseball, and we had a league going on. So besides many of the guys that you're mentioning, I love Kat Nomura, the catcher, who reminded me of like kind of the Johnny Bench, I guess, of Japan. I guess if you can come up with an equivalency, so many. Masaichi Kaneda was probably like one of their best pitchers, and who was their Cy Young name? It's like their equivalent of the Cy Young award.
Aiji Sawamura.
Yes. And so, you have all of these great stories that, my goodness, it's a whole nother world you could get into, Japanese baseball history. And then I'm going to have on several guests in the coming weeks. We're going to talk about Caribbean baseball.
Oh,
And
wow.
you get into the whole world of baseball in the Dominican and Cuba and Puerto Rico and beyond, and as it was coming through the 20s and 30s. And the Negro Leagues had a hand in spreading that baseball brand throughout the Caribbean
Yep.
to Japan. There were several Japanese tours.
That's right.
I mean, the famous ones.
Biz Mackey led one of them. I think it was 28. I might be wrong about that,
No,
but he was fundamental to baseball in Japan
they
in sort of
loved
a lefty O'Doul
them.
light kind of way.
Yeah, they loved the Negro League players when they went there. Now they were not the first ones. I mean, it goes back to Al Spalding. I love that book. Have you read that book about Al Spalding's World Tour?
I'm sorry, I haven't.
Oh, you got to check it out. There's a book out there. I can't remember the name. It may be called that. I'm not sure, but it's about Al Spalding's first World Tour that was back in 1880s or 1890 or whatever year it was, and it's fascinating. I mean, they basically carted up a bunch of Major League Baseball players when the season was over, and they went literally around the world in 80 days, like the movie, and they played baseball in some of the most crazy places. If you check it out, there's pictures of where they played at the near the pyramids in Egypt, and
Yes.
all kinds of crazy stuff, fun stuff. That's what makes baseball so much fun. I mean, there is such a great history, and it's everywhere. And so many little stories, and everybody's got their own take on it, and everybody's got their own. I mean, I'm going to have some guys on coming down hopefully down the road we're going to talk about European and British baseball because it's popular there. I mean, you don't think
Hey,
about it, but
I've one of my little hobbies is collecting baseball cards of players in various halls of fame.
hmm
Britain has its own baseball hall of fame,
yeah,
believe it or not.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So anyway, this was great. I appreciate you taking the time. I hope people, like I said, I'm going to get this out there into a couple other forums as well, and I really want people to check out your spreadsheets and your equivalencies and start that thought process going. Because this is going to be ongoing for quite some time.
Years.
The
Yeah.
research on all this, and it's going to take some time. Is it ever going to be perfect? No. But
No, it's not.
the other thing I hope people understand about that though is that you got to have the context. You have to understand the backstory and put it in perspective. Why was it that way? And you can't just say, it happened a long time ago. No, there's still issues going on today when it comes to
Absolutely.
racial tensions and so forth. This was all part of it. By ignoring it, you kind of got to accept it and hope you learn from it, and move forward with that knowledge, right? I mean, I don't know, what else you can do. That's why like I said, I appreciate the efforts that you made on this type of a project and all that work that you put in, you guys have put in on trying to put some context to not just the Negro Leagues, but even historical baseball players and Japan. I think it's awesome. But some of these other authors and researchers for such a long time that have been at this, you guys all deserve some credit for keeping that passion going, and hopefully more people start to pick it up and start to do it themselves. A lot of times I think today people kind of they want that instant gratification. A lot of this is hard work.
A lot of spreadsheets.
Yeah, and digging. I'm sure you had to do a lot of digging in. Have you done any research along those lines? Digging
I haven't
into.
I haven't done like the microfilm or microfiche or whatever old newspapers on reels. I haven't done that sort of thing. Those are the shoulders I stand on.
Mhm.
I take the numbers that appear on the Negro League's database, which is the result of all of that, and I analyze those. So my nose may be in compilations in the Negro League's database, in biographical stories to see, was this guy playing for, this? Was he doing that? Was he in the war? Was he injured?
Mm-hmm.
I'm more like, I'm the guy who comes after and after the research has been done, and tries to find some ways to understand more of what the research is revealing to us.
But you pointed out a lot of interesting things, though, and they're important. The fact that your perspective on it, but you mentioned something earlier. What was it about the Negro Leagues? Boy, oh boy, I had my train of thought, and I was thinking about it when you were talking, and then it left me. But the fact that, okay, I look at all this, all the work that not just you're doing, but all the seam heads and all the authors and researchers. You're kind of like, it's like archaeology. You're digging into the past, and you're uncovering some things, and you make a supposition, right? You make a based on what you know at the time. But you said this earlier, and it's absolutely true. Now you get some other information or additional information. It doesn't mean what you learned before and what you came up with before was wrong. It just means now you have a little bit better perspective on it. And
so
that's
I liken this to the world of software development, where they have something they call the MVP, and that's the minimum viable product. And the idea is you want to get a piece of software out the door that works, and then you're going to iterate as you go along, and you're going to improve it, and you're going to incorporate user feedback and do all the things that are going to make it a top-notch piece of software for the user. And that's kind of how I see the Negro Leagues at this point, where we've reached the point where we have a minimum viable product, and it's on the Negro Leagues database. And so as we continue researching and finding more and more information, we simply improve the product, and we're going to, there's a lot left that we can discover. For example, we don't yet have complete information about the Cuban League, and we have a lot of seasons, but there are more to come, and those will reveal something important about the players who are in them. We also we'll get information about the California Winter League, which may not have been may not have been a super high quality league, but it's important for us to be able to document what a player did there and how he dominated the competition. We can adjust for that, and we can find out, okay, what does it mean if somebody like Heavy Johnson went to California and just blew the doors off the place? What does that mean in terms of what he could have done in the major leagues? And that brings up an interesting point. I want to say one really important thing about major league equivalencies. The idea is not to say this is what he would have done in the majors. That's not at all the point. That's a kind of speculation that we can make based on qualitative and quantitative factors, or our fancy and imagination. What I'm trying to get through is that this is what the player did, not would have done, but did, just placed in a different frame. And that's important, because if somebody comes along and says, yeah, but Josh Gibson was the Babe Ruth of the Negro Leagues, I can say, well, that's an opinion matter, but here's what the statistics show, and here's what they look like in this different frame in a more familiar frame of reference. I can't say, well, of course Josh Gibson would have hit 600 home runs, so I'm going to give him 600 home runs. I can't do that. That's just making stuff up. But what I can do is say, this is what Josh Gibson would look like in context. And that's a really important but subtle difference.
Those are two great takeaways I hope people get. I like the minimum viable product and what an MLE actually is, because it's going to be in the news a lot. Both of those things, because what's out there at Baseball Reference is, like you pointed out, it's probably the minimum product that they could put out there when you say, look, yes, it's important we do this now, and we'll keep on working on it, and we'll improve it. And so I'm glad you pointed those out. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun. As you keep doing things and you know any of your research, we got to get Miller on here too. Where's he at? Does he live by you or what? How do you?
He actually lives about 600 miles away in New Jersey.
Does he really? Okay. Well,
Yeah.
maybe we'll get the two of you guys on here one night and we can, or any time you guys. When are you doing your next Hall of Fame induction?
Well, I've got to get it through my the update of my Negro Leagues research.
Anytime,
and then
anytime you
start
guys
back up.
want to do a live stream of the Miller and Eric Hall of Fame induction, you let me know and we'll put it out there. But I appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun and maybe we'll get you guys involved in a out of the park project or something like that down the road. A lot of your work definitely would go right in line with a lot of the stuff that they do and what that simulation does. So I appreciate it.
was really fun to be here, Phil. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. And like I said, we'll do this again down the road.
Great.
All right, man. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.